Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
Hello, and welcome to Season 4. Yes, Season 4 of That's Enough Out of You. I am your host for the
main host, Billy, the main host.
The main host for the 4th season in a row. My name is Bill Rader, and the co-host for the 4th season in a row is Sean Kane. Sean, how are you?
Billy, how you doing, buddy?
I can't believe we made it this far.
Yeah. Well, most podcasts don't make it past 6, 7 episodes, Billy.
Well, we haven't been canceled yet, at least not that we know of.
No, we haven't.
Everything else is getting canceled.
But we're still rolling, Billy. We're still rolling. We got a great guest today. Introduce our returning guest, Billy, from Australia.
Yeah, Paul Abbott will be joining us this week, and great conversation as always with Paul. I mean, he's so knowledgeable. He really is one of the best researchers that I think we've spoken to. He just is very detailed, covers everything. But Sean, why don't you kind of give a preview of what the conversation was about?
Well, we talk about his book, and of course that's on our bookshop. People can get it there. But then we go into a lot on Jack Ruby. We go into who possibly could have given Ruby the Oswald kill orders, and we go over some of the things and who we actually believe. We talk a lot about Jerry O'Leary. Jerry O'Leary, who was a CIA media asset who was present during a lot of this, and he, professed to be this conspiracy theorist, but he actually was a holder of the official record. He really upheld the Warren Commission and the lone gunman theory. So we go into that. We talk a little bit about some FBI agents, some Dallas police officers. We talk about the actual Ruby trial. We go into, and then we talk a little bit about the Jim Garrison file index.
Right.
Talk MK Ultra, Jolly West. So we really do a really deep dive on Jack Ruby, and the fascinating part of this, I think, Billy, was when we talked about the kill order, because I think, like you said, Paul has such a great understanding and such a great knowledge, and one of the best researchers out there.
Yeah.
And still relatively young compared to, a lot of the other researchers. I mean,
Right.
He hasn't been doing this as long as a lot of the others, but he is fantastic. And, he really did a great contribution to the research community.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's get right to it, Sean. Let's get to our Season 4 premiere with Mr. Paul Abbott.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to announce to everybody that the That's Enough Out of You podcast is proud that we're going to sponsor the JFK Lancers November in Dallas conference. It's going to be November 21st through November 23rd at the Fairmont in Dallas, Texas. A lot of great speakers, researchers on the JFK assassination. And if you use our podcast promo, the That's Enough Out of You podcast promo code JFK10, you get 10% off the ticket. That's promo code JFK10. And you can find the tickets at the website assassinationconference.com. And a lot of great speakers. Paul Abbott is going to be there. A lot that we had on our show. Paul Abbott, Paul Blow, Johnny Kearns, Walter Herbst, Jeff Meek, Linda Giovanni Zambanini, who's coming up on our show. And a lot of other great researchers, and it's about the JFK assassination. So again, we're proud to promote this event. It's November 21st through November 23rd at the Fairmont in Dallas, Texas. The website is assassinationconference.com, and the That's Enough Out of You promo code is JFK10, and you get 10% off the ticket. So it's definitely going to be worth it, and I hope people are going to come out and enjoy the event. Unfortunately, Bill and I can't make it, but I know it's going to be a great event because the speakers are tremendous. So any other information that you want, you can message me and I could get that for you, or I could put you in contact with somebody who can answer the questions for you. Again, thank you, everybody.
All right. Paul Abbott, welcome back to That's Enough Out of You.
Hi, Sean. Hi, Bill. It's great to be with you guys again.
Yeah.
Same here, buddy. Thanks for coming back.
Live from down under.
Absolutely. Beautiful Sunday morning. Here we're just coming out of our winter and getting to that normal sunny way of life here in Australia now. Yeah, it's good.
Nice. Yeah.
It's a late Saturday night here, right, Billy?
It sure is.
You guys are drinking beer. I'm drinking coffee.
All right. So, Sean, where do we start?
Well, let's start. I mean, Paul's been on our show before, so his great book on Jack Ruby. But I want to start, Paul. Let's talk about the threats on Oswald's life, and how legitimate were those threats. But let's go do a deep dive on that.
Thanks. It'd be good to talk about that. It's something I wrote a little bit more extensively about since I brought the book out. I do cover off on them in very general terms, but my book, it really is a deep dive into the actual shooting of Oswald. You know, how it came to happen and the conditions at, of course, Dallas City Hall that allowed it to happen. So, of course, the threats are an important facet of that weekend. So I needed to give some coverage to it, but didn't want to lead myself down another rabbit hole necessarily in my own book. So since I have published the book and have been free to kind of wander on other facets regarding that weekend and Oswald's time in Dallas police custody, that is an aspect that I've gotten into a little bit more. So the threats, I mean, there was a lot of pulling it back, over that weekend. There were a lot of emotional and crazy and all kinds of responses, calls, along the spectrum, if you like, coming into the Dallas police, but also the sheriff's department. And I guess that's probably where the most publicized threats really recorded, and that's with this committee, this representative of a committee calling in to say, I've just I'm part of a committee, one of 100 people, and we've voted that decided that Lee Oswald can't live to be transported to the county jail. So that's kind of the general gist of the most publicized threats. And it's an interesting story because it really started and stopped with the Dallas FBI. As I've been able to do a little bit more of a deeper exploration. So really for me, I think it probably actually starts with Police Chief Jesse Curry. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with footage of Curry in his office, holding court with 5 or 6 reporters. It's one of many numerous times that he was talking about talking about Oswald's background and the way what things that he was and wasn't saying. In this particular press conference, it's Tom Pettit. I think he's the NBC correspondent from New York. He asks the chief, did the did the FBI let you know about Lee Oswald? being in Dallas before, the lead up to President Kennedy's visit. And Chief Curry, frankly, says, and I think he's being completely honest here. No, they didn't. They normally do when someone of that category, a communist, subversive sympathizer, is in town. The FBI absolutely do normally let us know, and they didn't in this particular instance. So I think that was Curry being probably, he was being honest, but probably a little bit too honest for his own good. So that was at 11 o'clock on Saturday, November the 23rd. And of course, that reports of that go out straight away. It was a filmed interview, and it raises the ire of the FBI hierarchy.
Sure.
Arthur Deloach, it would do. J. Edgar Hoover. So they mobilized straight away to obviously negate all damage of Curry's claims that they either knew about someone like Oswald being in Dallas but didn't act on it, or they didn't know about someone like Oswald in Dallas and therefore didn't know to act on it. So either way, the FBI aren't coming off looking good thanks to Curry's comments.
Yeah, he's going to put the blame onto them. He's pushing the blame onto them.
Absolutely, but I think if you watch the footage, I think he's just being honest, and he's not kind of putting his PR political kind of larger context kind of hat on when he's saying these things. I just think he's been caught in an honest moment. So what happened was it sparked a flurry of action from all the way up to Arthur Deloach, getting J. Gordon Shanklin to speak to Jesse Curry and essentially have him walk back his comments. But who else was also enlisted in that effort was Jerry O'Leary. And Jerry O'Leary, he was on the ground there as a reporter for the Washington Evening Star. Very well regarded, very experienced reporter that, like so many, in the afternoon of November the 22nd, flew to Dallas, converged on Dallas to obviously cover the news as it was unfolding there after the Kennedy assassination. So it's interesting that the FBI not only used their, the special agent in charge in Dallas to get on to responding to these claims by Curry, but they also mobilise a reporter that's on the ground. So right there, that tells you that there is a clear link between O'Leary and the FBI. I'm sure that was pretty common. Doesn't necessarily make him a full-on FBI asset or an agent or anything like that, but just a useful asset, a useful contact in the media of the day. So anyway, what happens is come 1 o'clock, so barely a couple of hours later, Curry steps out puts him out to holds another little press conference out on the third floor, like literally in front of the Homicide and Robbery Bureau Division. That hallway there, and says, "Look, what I said earlier, I didn't mean to infer anything. The FBI have only ever been cooperative, and I'm sure if they knew about Oswald, they would have let us know, etc., etc." So he's really walking back what he said barely a couple of hours later, and it turned out that was because Gordon Shanklin had a chat with him, and apparently in response to that chat, or during that chat, Curry was very apologetic. Well, I didn't mean to, I didn't mean to infer anything. I'm sorry. And Jerry O'Leary was also spent time with Curry to basically pen or write an article to kind of put the final sentence stop on this damage control. But nonetheless, I guess the proverbial mud was sticking, and the longer that Oswald was alive and in custody, and clearly within these scenes of absolute chaos. I mean, we're all familiar. If you watch the footage, Oswald was being led completely unguarded, obviously in contact with police personnel, but being, pulled through, dozens and dozens of people in those hallways. So the longer that these scenes are allowed to carry on, I think the FBI, with whatever they did or didn't know about Oswald at the time, and their culpability in terms of him, because he, as we know now, he was an asset, and at the very least he was on their radar. They were monitoring him. I think that the situation, the longer he was alive in police custody, or at least in police custody, the worse it was for them, the less control that they could have on the situation, because of course there wasn't a federal crime to assassinate or murder the president of the United States. The only thing technically well, because it was just literally the fact that he was charged with Tippett's murder, really the FBI didn't have too much to do officially. There was no grounds for them to officially be involved in any part of the investigation while Oswald was still alive.
Yeah, true.
So what I think that all culminates in is, and I'll probably just lay out how it all happened, and we can speculate at the end. But what happened was, come that early Sunday morning, so the hours of that Sunday morning, Deputy Sheriff C.C. McCoy, he's talking on the phone to Bill Decker, the county sheriff.
Right.
I think Decker was calling in to check in on McCoy, who was at the county jail on shift that night. And they're talking about, when or if Oswald would be transferred that night, because at that particular point in time, all Decker had heard was accounts, from a reporter saying that, oh no, Chief Curry came out that Saturday evening before and said, no, Oswald, we're going to transfer him at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Mm. And that word got back on that to Decker. He was never officially told that by police. So he's obviously on high alert, and he's keeping his sheriffs on high alert for any change, but basically just being ready to enact Oswald's transfer, because of course, transfer of prisoners is down to the county sheriff. It is their responsibility. They literally present at a police department with all of the paperwork to essentially take into custody the prisoner, and obviously they move them to their premises, so obviously the nearest jail. That's how it should have gone down with Oswald as well, even in these exceptional circumstances. And that could have happened as early as Friday evening, when Oswald had been charged with the Tippett murder.
Right. Sure.
So that in itself, you can imagine Decker would have been on tenterhooks ever since, waiting to kick into gear to go in and carry out the transfer of Oswald. Sure. So anyway, he and McCoy, his deputy, are talking about over the phone, and to the point of even speculating, if Oswald's going to be transferred safely, it'd be better to do it at night, in the cover of darkness. So they're even to the point of speculating how soon the sun comes up in Dallas, that particular time of year. Anyway, about an hour or so later, a phone call comes in to the sheriff's department, and it's a man saying, a male voice, and McCoy takes the call. And this person says, I'm a representative of a committee, and we're going to, you should know that we're going to kill Oswald. He is not going to make it alive to the county jail. The reason I'm telling you this is out of concern. I don't want any sheriff personnel or anyone from the FBI or the Dallas Police Department to be hurt. So that's phone call number one. Another phone call comes in a little bit later, and it sounds like to McCoy, because he's the one that's taking the call at the sheriff's department. It sounds like it's two voices. So someone is on the phone when he takes the call, He asks if it's the sheriff's department, and McCoy says, yes, it is. And then it sounds like there's a kind of a handing over of the phone to someone else, another voice, who largely says the same thing. You should know that we're going to, there's going to be an attempt on Oswald's life. So McCoy has recorded all this down, and he even had the wherewithal to actually have one of his fellow deputy sheriffs, a man by the name of, I'm not sure if it's his first name or surname, Virgil, listen in to at the end of one of those calls. A short time later, McCoy gets a phone call coming in from the sheriff's department, from the FBI department, from a special agent, Milton Newsom. And he's asking, did you receive any threatening phone calls? Or sorry, let me walk that back. We should, the FBI department, we received a threatening phone call. I'm not sure if he even asked the sheriff's department if they indeed got a threatening phone call, but it culminates in Newsom saying, we need to let the police department know. So Newsom then calls the DPD and speaks to Captain Fraser, who was the night captain in charge that night, and just says, look, we've had a threat come in, a threat on Oswald's life, not sure what we need to do about it. I'm just letting you know. Fraser said at that particular point in time, well, we've not received any threats, nothing, we've not heard anything about it. Then a little bit later as well, Captain Fraser's contacted by Newsom, Agent Newsom from the FBI department to relay the same information. And again, he tells Newsom, no, we haven't, the DPD, we've not had any threatening phone calls come in. Now, again, he would know because he was the man in charge that night at City Hall.
Right.
So what this does, it's flurries on really now Fraser's part, a series of phone calls. He first tries to, and he does reach J.W. Fritz, who's obviously the person within the DPD who is in charge of Oswald, and tells him of the threat phone calls that he's been contacted about by both the Sheriff Department and DPD. And Fritz says, well, no, it's not anything to do with me. You need to let Chief Curry know about that because he's the one that's handling Oswald's transfer. So there's a bit of passing the buck there. So Fraser tries to reach Chief Curry at home and is not able to get through. There's no it's like the phone's off the hook or the line's out of order. He reaches Captain Fritz, goes back to Captain Fritz again, and there's no help. There's nothing like Fritz stepping in and going, okay, well, if you can't reach Captain Curry, we need to do something about this now. There's nothing like that. He just has to keep trying to reach Chief Curry, to the point where when he's the person that comes on shift to relieve him, Captain Talbot, he actually has the phone line checked to see if there's actually anything wrong and any tenable reason why Chief Curry can't be reached by phone. There doesn't seem to be an issue, but they're still not able to reach him. So they actually send a couple of patrol officers around to Curry's house to give him the news finally that threats have come in on Oswald's life. What do we do? So this is granted. This is around 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning now. And all Curry turns around and says is, tell the FBI, tell the Sheriff Department, so Decker and the FBI, that I will be at City Hall at around 8:30 that morning. So nothing about, okay, we need to act quickly, get Oswald into any kind of vehicle while it's still relatively dark and we can act quickly, get him to the county jail. There's nothing like that. He does nothing other than say when he's going to be getting into work that morning. So that's the kind of the what happened aspect of it. But what's really interesting about that whole story is that the threats, the accounts of these threats started with the FBI. So the person at the FBI office that allegedly first took a phone call from threat makers at around 2 o'clock that morning that sparked the FBI to call the sheriff department and to call the police department. That was a clerk by the name of Vernon Glossop. So he got this phone call, and Special Agent Newsom, he wasn't around apparently when this phone call came in. So we're not even sure that there's actually no record other than this clerk's notes that he took, and even then we can't find any, there's no evidence of those notes that he apparently took down having received that threatening phone call and passed on to the special agent in charge, Milton Newsom, to act on. So it's kind of like, did that first phone call that prompted this whole flurry of activity, was that actually legitimate? Because we then have those those couple of phone calls into the sheriff's department, and they're literally the same kind of dialogue, the same. It's very and it could be genuine threat makers just running off the same kind of script, but it's just all very convenient that it first came from the FBI. They weren't interested in whether the sheriff department received a threatening phone call themselves directly. And interesting that the Dallas Police Department did not get, there's no record of them getting a threatening phone call similar to the one that Sheriff Deputy McCoy got. But just closing out this particular facet, because I know we've got the Billy Grammar side of things to talk about as well. But closing this out, the person that actually, on behalf of the FBI, took the statements of Deputy Sheriff McCoy, Captain Fraser, Captain Talbot, was Milton Newsom. So he's the one that he was there at the start. Somehow he wasn't in the office at 2 o'clock in the morning to be there when the threatening phone call first came into the FBI. But yeah, he was the one that made sure that the sheriff's department knew about them. He was the one that made sure that the Dallas Police Department knew about them. And he was in the position.
Do you think there's a chance that Newsom could have staged these calls to maybe discredit the Dallas police and kind of, make the FBI the focus of the investigation?
100%, 100%. Because I think there was still a bit of damage control with what Curry's comments the day before, and I think there was an element of not necessarily. I think that there could have been good intent to finally get the DPD to get into gear and actually move Oswald like it ought to have, because we know that Hoover was on the record as not being happy with how the Dallas Police Department were handling the whole situation. Curry was coming out left, right, and center and saying things which would probably make it hard for a jury to be impartial because of all these comments and commentary from him and Wade. So 100%, I think there was a couple of intents to get Oswald transferred. That's the best case scenario we can hope for, or absolutely make the Dallas Police Department look incredibly incompetent.
How much do we know about Newsom and what kind of career he had with the FBI and what kind of agent he was?
Well, he went on to, even at the time of the HSCA, he was still with the FBI at that particular point in time. He turned out to have a 30-year career with the DPD, with the FBI in Dallas. And the only other touch point that he had to the events of November 22nd was the handling of the Bronson film, where he disputed, having allegedly watched the Bronson film, that it captured the side of the book depository that was obviously facing out across Dealey Plaza. So that was his only other touch point to that weekend. So I think it's incredibly credible that yes, whether he got on a payphone and actually called back into his own office and pretended to be a threat maker, or the notion of a call was made up, and then obviously the calls that the sheriff's department received was him, or someone acting on his instructions. I think that's what it all came down to. Now that's not to say that of course the FBI were directly involved in what would ultimately happen to Oswald, but there's a case there that they certainly benefited from it, because then they now had skin in the game, because with Oswald dead, there wouldn't be a local trial. The investigation couldn't be contained to just being something completely local. All these reports of Oswald being down in Mexico and taking money and coming back, with the inference that he was paid to assassinate President Kennedy, all that was allowed to run rife. And of course, then we come into the territory of how the Warren Commission, got up and running. And I'll tell you, Jerry O'Leary had something to do with that whole, reports of, the Mexico reports and things like that as well. But we can get into that a little bit later. So I think that's because there is precious little. You cannot find anything else on Newsom. No scrutiny on how that whole episode, the threats, the threats were allowed to take place, and probably the last little note on how Newsom handled it all. Captain Fraser, he was allowed to testify to the Warren Commission, and as was common with the witnesses that the Warren Commission spoke to, they would actually recall back. They would show people the statement that was attributed to them by the FBI, and Captain Fraser's looking through this statement that Newsom took of his, and there were four. The statement was literally 4 paragraphs, and he disputed 3 of them. So Newsom attributed or said that Fraser knew about the details of the transfer whenever it was going to take place the following morning, and Fraser said, no, I didn't know anything like that. He attributed Fraser to being a part of the plans. Again, Fraser never was. He couldn't have been, because he was working nights. He really had nothing to do with the handling of Oswald. So incredibly suspicious that how much he distorted the record of both, particularly McCoy, the lowly sheriff deputy who took the first phone calls. He really simplified and watered down his statement, as well as Fraser's. And ultimately, there was one little final kicker in each statement that Newsom attributed to both Fraser and McCoy, and was that was how much publicity. There's references in there about how much publicity the Dallas police were putting around the topic of Oswald's transfer. So he uses those statements to just get in those final damning little digs
right
on the Dallas Police Department. So I do, Sean, absolutely. I think it was a really targeted and local campaign to absolutely undermine the DPD at the very least. Hopefully affect Oswald's safe transfer, but who knows? And but they sure benefited once he was killed.
Wow. All right. Do you want to talk a little bit, because I really want to go in detail on Jerry O'Leary. So he's definitely some kind of, you mentioned his connection to the FBI, but he's also a CIA asset. And the interesting thing about O'Leary is he kind of calls himself a conspiracy theorist, but if you really look at his work, I mean, he's really going with every official story and everything he covers. So, he's really out to discredit what you would call conspiracy theorists when you look at it. So, you want to talk about O'Leary a little bit?
He was a very savvy and adroit communicator. He was, if you watch those clips of him around the time of the HSCA hearings, he was, right. And that's great. Robbie from Out of the Blank, is puts out a lot of those clips, and you can see O'Leary and other people, just giving commentary that is neither here or there on what's been discussed. And I think O'Leary was very, very skilled PR man, very obviously a media man who was he used his words incredibly well. But his background is absolutely fascinating. He actually started in journalism before going into service in World War II. He actually started with the Washington Evening Star. Took obviously that sabbatical to go and serve, and when he left service, he came back to basically pick up the same job. And it was around that time, particularly probably moving forward to the early 50s, that he first came into contact and became friends with David Atlee Phillips, who's someone that we all know as being very central figure in a lot of aspects of the Kennedy assassination, and of course Oswald. So that was to do with the Central American affairs at the time. That was a world in which Phillips was orbiting in, and O'Leary was placed to report on as well. So there's a friendship there with Phillips. But the thing about O'Leary was he continued to serve as a reserve with the U.S. Marines, which is an interesting point, because I'll come back to. But that obviously puts him now a little bit closer to the background of Oswald,
Sure.
who himself was a serving U.S. Marine as well. Come the early 60s, O'Leary is clearly keeping in contact with someone like David Phillips, because in November 1962, so about a month after the Cuban Missile Crisis, O'Leary's put out a piece on Russian missiles still being hidden in caves in Cuba. And it's an article, it's out there, you can see it. And he makes specific reference to the DRE representative. I forget his name now, but someone that was clearly in the same orbit as Phillips and Joanides and all those guys as well. So a really detailed and informed article, which is clearly a piece fed to him, built on information that was fed to him by someone like Phillips. So we've got a bit of context there in terms of a potential informal linkage to the CEO at that time. At the same time, Jerry O'Leary was one of the most highly regarded reporters on the FBI side of things as well. He was Cartha Deloach, I think, made reference to him being one of their most highly regarded members of the media. And so their history goes back to the case of the story of the kidnapped heir to the Coors empire, and the man that apparently Alfred Coors, the beer in like 1960. Jerry O'Leary was apparently instrumental in giving a running, reporting on the investigation into finding the perpetrator of that, and he was using FBI information that apparently through his articles was instrumental in apprehending the person. I think his name was Joseph Corbett, who was apprehended and ultimately found guilty for that crime. So the FBI were clearly using someone like O'Leary for the ends of one of their own investigations at the time. So coming to Dallas in November 22nd, O'Leary's the man on the ground for the FBI. So we don't just have to. It's not just in regards to the Curry incident. He was very useful to them at other times during that period. He was there when the backyard photographs were found, of Oswald holding the Mannlicher Kekano, and obviously the left-wing literature as well, and he was putting out reports. He was there when the reports of Oswald being suspected of shooting at General Walker as well. He was right in the thick of that. But probably most interestingly was, and this is a memo that can be very easily found on Mary Farrell. O'Leary met with a CIA contact in Dallas, who is an unimpeachable source, according to his words, in this immediate aftermath of Kennedy's assassination. And this CIA man told O'Leary in Dallas that Lee Oswald came back from Mexico City with $5,000 in cash.
Right.
So right there, this is at the time when, these other reports of Oswald being seen with being seen taking money from a Cuban in Mexico. That's when
Right.
these stories were all starting to circulate. Hal Hendricks was obviously doing his bit with this pre-prepared legend of Oswald ready to go. So
Right.
O'Leary was right in the fix of that. But to his credit or not, he didn't run a report on what this CIA man told him. He went straight to the FBI.
Interesting.
He went straight to the FBI and said, I've got this story. What should I do with it? The FBI told him not to do anything. And that was only after they consulted with the State Department and the White House. So no story ever eventuated, but I think that was part of the impetus to bring in that presidential commission. And I think it potentially could have been that reference that Johnson said to Earl Warren about that little incident down in Mexico. I think that would have been kind of folded into that. So it's just fascinating that O'Leary was just so instrumental right in the middle of a lot of the reporting, but also a lot of the feeding back of intelligence back to the FBI, while at the same time meeting with a CIA contact in Dallas. I mean, who could that be? Do you know what I mean?
It's, what's interesting about that is because we know later on there's a conversation between Johnson and Hoover, and that's after the conference they had with McCone and Katzenbach, and Hoover tells Johnson that his FBI agents heard they interrogated Oswald in the jail cell in Dallas. They also heard the tapes of Oswald in Mexico City, and the voice recognition didn't match.
Yeah.
So he's telling him right there that he was impersonated. And now you got O'Leary saying about this CIA guy telling him that Oswald was there getting money. Yeah. So it's just the fascinating dynamic there of what's going on.
We will be right back. DK's Corner, now located at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, is serving up the area's best tasting food at respectable prices. Known for our great cheesesteaks, DK's also has delicious breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and catering 7 days a week. You'll love the wraps, soups, and pizza too. We're now open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Visit DK's Corner on Facebook to see our daily specials, and make sure to follow and like us while you're there. We offer local delivery to homes and businesses, takeout, or come and dine in our new restaurant in Jessup. Call or text DK's Corner at 570-209-0278 or hit us up on DoorDash. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. We will be right back. Hey, Sean, I want to make sure that everybody knows about our Patreon. I know we mention it every once in a while on the show, but really important that people check out our Patreon. If you go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, or just click on the link in the description, you'll find we do an extra episode every week called The Speakeasy, and it's really usually just Sean and I kind of talking about the day's events, current events, and things like that. But a lot of exciting things. I mean, I know, Sean, you're constantly putting articles up there on our Patreon.
Yeah, and sometimes, Bill, we do bring on special guests. We had Dave Whelan on, we had Scranton Dave, and every now and then we bring Patreon members on. We've had different members, Scott Alfieri, Michael Pilch, Dan Hankey was on. So, there's an opportunity there if you want to come on the show with us. So there's a lot of things we're doing. Like you mentioned, Bill, the articles. I put articles up on a free site, but I also put articles on Patreon that's not available on the free site. You know, we have a lot of times I put up future intel about guests that we have coming up and stuff that we have coming up on the podcast. And you know, we created a great community there, Bill. There's a lot of chat goes on there. There's a community chat and a lot of the comments back and forth. Just the Patreon members always have great insight. So it's a community, Bill, and it's an opportunity for people to join for a really good price, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat it. You can certainly become a free member if you want to. There's also tiered levels to you know, with subscription amounts, and just for $1 that gets you everything. I mean, the $1 gets you everything, you know, including our weekly show. There's other tiers. I think, Sean, what is there, a $3 tier?
$3, there's a $5, there's a $10. I mean, and there's a $50 if people could afford to give 50.
Yeah, I mean, totally up to you. You know, once you join, you can make that decision, and certainly, you know, there's no commitment. I mean, you could join for a month or 2 months or whatever you want, and then you know, you can switch your subscription around. Totally up to you. I mean, that's, you know, people love Patreon for that reason. It really is. It makes it easy. It's kind of, you know, however you want to do it, however you want to join. And we certainly appreciate anybody who joins our Patreon and supports the show, because we definitely, you know, Sean, we're not getting rich off of this podcast, that's for sure. But we definitely, you know, appreciate any support that we get from our listeners.
And, you know, we also have our merchandise store. If people want to check out, we have the shirt that I have on now. We have mugs up there. We have cups, hats, anything you can do to help the podcast grow. We also have a bookshop up there, Bill, where all the authors that we have on our podcast, we have their books up. And it supports local bookstores, Bill. The money goes to local bookstores, a little bit to us, and then to the publisher and to the author. So it's a real good opportunity instead of buying Amazon and you know, making
supporting billionaires.
Right, sure. There's an opportunity. And as far as Patreon, one last thing, Bill, if you want to join as a free member, we do put some stuff up there for the free members, and then if you like it and you want to upgrade, you can do that.
Absolutely. So definitely check out our Patreon. Like I said, there's a link in the description to our Patreon, or you can just go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, look for our logo, and just fill in the information and you can join. All right, that's it, Sean. We appreciate all of our Patreon members, and we hope that you guys will consider checking it out if you haven't joined. Thank you.
It's ingenious when you think about it. The people behind President Kennedy's assassination, and I've referred a couple of times to Peter Dale Scott's, I'm not sure if you've read it, but his seminal book, and I'm struggling to remember exactly what it's called, Peter Dale Scott. But anyway, in it,
I read it. I forget the title. I read it.
Yeah, in it, he proposes a two-phase cover-up. The first phase was to have you know, this pre-prepared you know, legend story ready to go. That's the first line of defense. And then the second was to devise to leverage off you know, that damning information to force, you know, make it so explosive that you know, a government and, you know, all agencies under it would need to come in on the cover up. So I think O'Leary was right in the middle of it, and it's ingenious of the plotters, because they relied on these little, you know, the threat, the inferences of, you know, these connections, alleged connections between Oswald and God knows who down in Mexico, whether he even went there to begin with or not, that's even still a mystery. But you know, the inference of Oswald, you know, killing President Kennedy and having been paid to do so by either the Soviets and or the Cubans, right then at that particular point in time, that information that O'Leary could have written a very, you know, explosive piece around, that could have thrust, you know, the United States into one hell of a war, and of course that threat was what was used to usher in the cover up. And
sure,
Johnson
talked about that. About 20 million Americans could be killed, he said. But the interesting thing about O'Leary and his his relationship with David Atlee Phillips is that Phillips is heavily involved in the Mexico City aspect. He's out there, and then later on, when he's questioned, he would lie repeatedly about his involvement. I mean, he's like Professor Paul Blow talks about, Phillips just, he hits at almost every touch point. Like, you just can't disconnect him from this whole thing. And then later on, I want to talk about, where possibly the orders could have been given from, the CIA to Ruby to take Oswald out. I mean, Gordon McClendon, to me, is one strong suspect because he's the radio man in Dallas. He's a CIA asset tied to David Atlee Phillips, and he's really close to Jack Ruby.
Yeah.
So Phillips is really in the thick of this thing.
He is. And look, the immediate implication or inference is that I think it was Phillips that was speaking to O'Leary in Dallas to give him that interesting piece of information.
Right.
And whether or not, I'm sure he would have known, but it's kind of almost immaterial. Whether he knew that his friend in O'Leary was an FBI asset that would surely feed this information up through his channels to the FBI or not, and would just go ahead and run with the story. It wouldn't have mattered when Phillips was giving that information to O'Leary. The way the outcome would have been the same. A detail like that, no matter how it came out, whether it was made public or it was pushed up through the intelligence channels,
right,
it surely would have ushered in this need to just have an all points cover up on how the assassination happened, but make it all on the shoulders of Oswald. That was the objective.
Right. Absolutely. 100%. 100%. So do you want to talk about the Ruby trial, or is there anything you want to talk about before that?
Well, probably just one other episode about O'Leary, which it's something that it kind of comes right back to the actual shooting of Oswald. So there's an interesting little incident that I do cover in my book, again very generally, but I kind of end it all with a bit of a question mark. But I've since unpacked it and again done a real deep dive into it. It's all on my Substack. It's this episode of the three reporters, O'Leary included, miraculously racing down 3 or 4 flights of stairs to beat an elevator that covers the same distance in barely 15 seconds. To be on hand to witness Oswald's shooting down in the basement. And for this whole time, I just couldn't work out how such a convoluted and it just did not make sense and was evidentially not correct. How this story was allowed to be believed, but also why it was whipped up in the first place. And it was in my doing my further work on looking into O'Leary that I've been able to put forward, I think, what's probably the most credible, theory onto why it happened. So, just to give you a bit of context, Oswald's transfer it kicked off at 11:15 with him being moved out from Fritz's homicide bureau area up on the 3rd floor. And it was a very simple case of Oswald being escorted by Lavelle and Graves and Fritz and Leslie LD Montgomery, and I think Swain as well, just walking a very short distance around the corner to the elevator that connected the rest of City Hall down to the basement. So the story goes is that these 3 reporters, Ike Pappas, Maurice Carroll and Jerry O'Leary, were there at the 3rd floor to witness Oswald being led to the elevator. And once he'd been taken into the elevator and on the way down to the basement to get the transfer underway, these reporters turned around and were able to run downstairs, which didn't lead directly down to the basement, and somehow get there before even Oswald's stepped out of the elevator. It's something that has been largely overlooked, and it was earliest kind of questioning I can find of this episode was through researcher Timothy Sweek in the third decade. I think he wrote a kind of a question mark type kind of a remark or statement to it in one of his articles in the 1970s. But it was just, it did not happen that way. I'll tell you why. Ike Pappas wasn't up on the third floor. We know this because his very first statement had him arriving at City Hall and coming straight down to the basement, and that's where he was. Right. He did not make any references to being up on the third floor until O'Leary came out, and he was the one that generated this convoluted story of, being on the third floor with a couple of other reporters, and they were able to race down to the basement in time to be there when Oswald was brought out and shot. And I've just, this whole time I've been asking, what was it of such significance that a lie would have to be made up to have these reporters up on the third floor? And the only thing that I could work out was that one last statement was attributed to Oswald up there of saying that he wanted to speak to someone from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. That's the only thing of significance that happened. Other than that, it was straightforward. All of the police personnel, they didn't report of any strange occurrence, or even of Oswald saying he wanted to speak to the ACLU. No one said that except for Jerry O'Leary. Jerry O'Leary was the first person to originate that statement, and it came the day after Oswald's shooting, because he was enlisted by the FBI to start with the Oswald lone nut. We have to make the American people believe at all costs that Oswald was responsible for this. And I think that one seemingly innocuous but clearly leading inference that Oswald was pleading for the ACLU right up to the end, which obviously had the perception of, furthered the perception of him being communist linked. I think that was the reason for O'Leary making up this story of being up on the third floor at the beginning of Oswald's transfer to witness him saying he wanted to speak to the ACLU, and then be able to rush down the stairs to be in place at Oswald's shooting. And the reason for the making up the story of rushing down the stairs was because all three reporters were filmed down in the basement in the seconds leading up to Oswald's shooting. Right. In my book, I put my hand up. I referred to Detective Beck as being one of the last members of the police to walk out. But through the help of Linda Giovanna Zambonini, I was able to identify that person as Jerry O'Leary. Wow. So I'm not sure if you've seen that footage, but in literally 10 seconds before Oswald's brought out, Jerry O'Leary comes out, and then you've got Ike Pappas holding the microphone in his light-coloured trench coat, and you've got Mickey Carroll. So I think that's why the lie of the stairs was made up, was because O'Leary thought, well, hang on, I've said in this article that Oswald said ACLU, he wanted to speak to the ACLU, but oh no, I've been filmed down in the basement, so I have to make up this story about rushing down the stairs, and there's Ike Pappas and Maurice Carroll. I have to draw them in as corroborators. And that's how their statements, if you read through their statements, and again, this series is on my Substack, I lay out how the statements were played out. And ultimately, Ike Pappas, he hardly corroborated anything that O'Leary said, right the way until the Warren Commission. Even in the Warren Commission, get this is probably the thing that seals it all for me the most. Bert Griffin spoke when Ike Pappas was testifying for the Warren Commission in July. He brings up, we've spoken with Jerry O'Leary. He mentioned to us that you raced down the stairs to get down there in time to see Oswald shooting, or words to that effect. So Jerry O'Leary was never on the record as talking to the Warren Commission, yet he's having this. He's clearly spoken with them, clearly off the record. What the hell made Jerry O'Leary so important? Right. Everything I've just said for the last 20 minutes. There you go. Yeah. Excellent. Sorry, guys, it's a lot, but it's all on my Substack, and I lay it out with a lot more detail.
That's fascinating. Billy, you got something?
It never ceases to amaze me, Sean. I mean, we've talked about this so many times on our podcast, how just, nonchalant the Dallas police were with the most, the most famous criminal at that point, the most famous criminal in the world, the most famous murderer, alleged murderer in the world. It was almost like, he was just some guy that they had in a drunk tank. I mean, they should have, that place should have been locked down. There should have been nobody should have had access except anybody who absolutely had to be there.
Mm.
And it just goes to show you. I mean, this was there's no way he was going to get out of there alive. Just no way.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think that probably talks, it kind of leads in nicely to the Ruby side of things, because the more work I do on this, and the more people I continue to speak to about it, learning about the culture and the atmosphere that permeated through the Dallas police at the time. I think there was I think it was just the Oswald shooting. It was just allowed to happen, and I don't think it had to be some grand conspiracy. I've outlaid, when we spoke the last time about some key people that were clearly new or
Sure.
and involved in setting it up. But you get someone like Ruby, who was, he all he was to be a part of the Dallas police, all he was missing was a badge. He was so ingrained in the DPD, comping them drinks and free access to his club and God knows what else beyond that. He was just, I think Ruby was a useful idiot, and the fact that he was, the mob link aspect, I think was that was kind of convenient. But he was no doubt positioned to come in and be the shooter of Oswald, because it would have been a very easy pitch to him. Look, something has to be done about this. This Oswald, if you come in and shoot him, be on the scene at the time, it'll be a crime of passion. You'll walk out of jail a hero. I think it would have been an easy pitch to him, and because of his undying adoration for the DPD, even after he was apprehended, he kept very tight-lipped about not, was very mindful of not wanting to implicate anyone in the DPD, whether that was because he was, again, just completely, considered them all friends, or he was scared. Who knows? But it would have been an easy pitch for him, and then it was just a case of getting him into position. And once he was in position, that's when the transfer happened, and bang, there you go.
Right.
Let's talk about that for a second, though, because you're right about the climate in Dallas was a very hardcore right-wing climate, and that, of course, permeated through the Dallas Police Department. We talked, with Joe McBride about how many members were actually members of the Ku Klux Klan. But when you're talking about, with Ruby, like, who gave this actual order? We talked about, I mentioned Gordon McClendon before, and I mentioned, I think the last time we had you on, Paul, I mentioned that there was a rumor that Ruby asked for Gordon McClendon as soon as he was apprehended. And you said that, I believe you said that you weren't sure if that was confirmed. So I went back and I researched that, and that originated from Seth Cantor. We could take that for what it's worth, but that's where that came from, that Ruby did mention Gordon McClendon's name.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, this is where a lot of people go down the mob. The mob gave the order. The CIA would have went through the mob, and that would have been, Mayhew to Roselli to Traficante to probably Louis McWillie, who was close to Ruby. But the thing is, when you mentioned like his mob ties were kind of convenient, that's the way I was looking, because I always look at the mob as a scapegoat, and I look at the only mob guy that I see that's in tight with these CIA guys is Johnny Roselli, and there's documentation to back that up. Everything goes through Roselli, referring to the CIA Castro plots, CIA mob plots to kill Castro. So that was two of the ways they could have got to Ruby. But there was also, Jim Garrison felt that it was a guy, Lawrence Myers. And when you're talking about the index, the Garrison files that you did such a great job indexing in putting organizing those files together. He had a lot on Myers, and Myers, his son was Army intelligence. I try to find, when I was researching for Robert Mayhew, I try to find a connection to Myers because Mayhew has a Chicago tie. Myers was in Chicago, and there was kind of some loose associations, but I could never find anything direct to connect them. But Garrison really felt strongly, and there's a lot of files in there in the index on Lawrence Myers. And he felt that was and it kind of corresponded with a lot of David Farry's movements and his phone calls that day. So if you track what Garrison was doing with his files, he had a lot of connections there with Myers and what Farry was doing.
I think Lawrence Meyer, if I'm not mistaken, he was seen as a figure of interest for the Warren Commission. Bert Griffin and Leon Hubert put a report together, and I think it was about 11 or 12 pages, basically as a result of their initial period in Dallas. So from, I think it was the middle of March, just after Ruby's trial wrapped up, until I think Hubert stayed there a little bit later into May, but Griffin was of course pulled back from Dallas by the Warren Commission because he pushed Patrick Dean too hard and fast.
Right.
So that's a whole other thing. But anyway, as a result of their memo that they sent, they came back with a list of people of interest that they'd really like to, that they heard about or saw evidential reference to or just picked up on in their first time in Dallas. And Lawrence Myers, because I think he was from Chicago, so that's where any linkage to Ruby might have stemmed through. But yes, he was definitely one of those characters. And I think was he interviewed by the Warren Commission in the end?
I don't know if he officially was. I'm not sure if he was. I know his he's in the Garrison notes a lot. Garrison had a lot of stuff on him. He really did a deep dive on Myers and really suspected him.
Larry Crawford as well was someone that was referred to, as a real person of interest, and he was interviewed. I think he gave 2 sittings for the Warren Commission.
He looked a lot like Oswald.
Yes,
he
really does. Yeah, or did. Absolutely. And his story, he was I guess like a general hand or like a laborer for Ruby at his club. And so he was his time with Ruby, as of the after the shooting of Kennedy was, it was quite intense. Ruby came back to the club, or so the story goes, came back to the club after, whether he was out at Parkland Hospital, at the time of Kennedy's death announcement or wherever, and he was part of the effort to close down the clubs, and he moved around with Ruby a lot, overnight to the point where I think he and Ruby's roommate George Senator, I don't know what they were doing, but they were out near Stemmons Freeway, taking a photograph of the impeach Earl Warren billboard that was out there.
Yep.
And Crawford, and just having read over his Warren Commission statements very generally, he got out of Dallas unexpectedly, very quickly. Like literally like 6:30 that Saturday morning. And for no clear reason why, which in itself is interesting, particularly when we kind of regard him as a very, very close Oswald lookalike,
Sure. He could have definitely been one of those Oswald impersonators that we know around, because the resemblance is uncanny.
Yeah. But I think when we talk about McClendon and his links to both Jack Ruby and Phillips, 100%. There is that really should not be ignored. Is it proof of anything? Well, no, of course not. But it's evidence, or it's a suggestion. There is a connection. Right. Where there's a connection, then a conversation. It's easy for a conversation to have been had. And And I think it's like most things to do with this, whether the message, if we are going to explore the McClendon Ruby hypothesis, a very clear message from someone like Phillips to McClendon to Ruby. It would have been very easy for Ruby to have been recruited to be Oswald's shooter through that connection. So maybe it wasn't even anyone at the Dallas Police Department and said, "Hey, Jack, come on in and do this for us." That could be another angle to it as well.
Yeah.
And then again, all it comes down to is just readying the conditions at Dallas City Hall, because the thing that I think is important to remember is, the argument of, well, if Dallas police wanted Oswald dead, all they would have had to have done is just kill him behind closed doors, surely, and set up some kind of situation of acting in self-defense if Oswald somehow lashed out. If you think about his arrest at the Texas Theater, one of the first things that Oswald did was he shouted, "I'm not resisting arrest. I'm not resisting arrest." Right. And when you talk about testimony of people that were at the Texas Theater, the Dallas police, after Johnny Brewer allegedly pointed Oswald out in his seat at the theater, the police didn't descend on him directly. What they did was they started searching row by row, as if kind of trying to prompt or scare Oswald into running, trying to escape. And then they would have had grounds to have opened fire on him or whatever. But of course, Oswald, he was smarter than most people give him credit for. He sat still and he said, "I'm not resisting arrest." So with all that context, it really doesn't stack up that, with how Oswald was appearing really calm and, I don't know what dispatches you people have been given, but I emphatically deny these charges. No, sir, nobody's told me about that. The only time, I've heard of that is when someone asked me in the hall when he was, at the press conference, when someone was telling him, I think it was Bill Mercer, the reporter, telling him that he'd been charged with President Kennedy's murder. So Oswald was calm. He was absolutely calm at all times, cool, calm, and collected. So there was no grounds to silence him behind closed doors. It had to happen out in the open. And whether that was at the press conference or through, in the midst of all the throng of reporters, at any time he was being led around City Hall, it had to happen that way. And of course, time was ticking on. There was there was really the pressure to move Oswald, because he'd been charged for Tippett's murder, like I said, Friday evening. The longer he was at Dallas City Hall, kind of the more of a hot potato he was becoming. So it really came down to that transfer, the out in the open, and yes, letting reporters be there and apparently give them instructions not to encroach on him or ask anything. And that's how it had to happen. So all they needed was to just have Ruby on the spot. And that's where you get people like Blackie Harrison and Patrick Dean and Lewis Miller, who were clearly remain have a lot to answer for. So fascinating.
Let's talk about the Ruby trial a little bit.
Yeah, so the trial itself, that's interesting, because again, I think part of the narrative leading into it was that it was a crime of passion. Ruby just got so carried away with his sorrow for the Kennedy children, and he saw it as he was acting on behalf of the Jewish people. He needed to do something in response to this. There was a lot of apparent anger swept up through the Jewish community in Dallas, and that was kind of the argument for Ruby going into his trial. But the problem was, immediately from the outset, with his apprehension and being brought up to the jail on the 5th floor, the cover-up, the actual narrative in which would tie right the way through to his trial, that's when it started to be established. So, you know, the likes of Patrick Dean putting words in Ruby's mouth about how he entered the basement from the Main Street ramp, and that you know, all these you know, expressions of Ruby saying, you know, I wanted to. It was when I saw Oswald smirking on camera. You know, I wanted to do something. You know, then you know, I wanted to silence him and things like that. There all these motivations and you know, words were being attributed to Ruby. And I don't think he necessarily said all of that much, but the way that all unfolded with how Patrick Dean was the only person to say that you know, Ruby said all of these things, including how he entered the basement, for a long time before finally his fellow Dallas police officers, you know, after their first statements, finally backed Dean up. I think that's where a lot of the die was set against Ruby, and that's of course how he came to be charged with murder with premeditation, which of course in Dallas at the time was a death sentence, came with a death sentence penalty. So I think very quickly during the trial, you know, when Pat Dean, I think it was definitely McMillan and Archer, you know, all these kind of detectives who were with him, you know, in those immediate moments after his apprehension for shooting Oswald, they really sunk the boot in on Oswald, and really on a united front. Sunk the boot in on Ruby as a united front, and you know, painted the picture of him definitely shooting Oswald with premeditation. You know, he was planning to do it. He wanted to do it a lot over that weekend, as opposed to his argument of, oh look, there was an opportunity, I took it, you know, just while I happened to be up the road transferring money. That got flushed away very quickly, and the narrative that these DPD set against Ruby is how it stuck and how he came to be charged with murder.
And then we know later on that Jolly West at MK Ultra program, he would visit Ruby in prison, and he would be a mess after those visits, whatever he did to him.
And even absolutely, and even at the time, you know, there was when he was being set upon after shooting Oswald, you know, it was kind of like he was in an incoherent state even then. Guys, you know me, I'm Jack Ruby. What are you doing? It was kind of like he didn't know where he was or what he was doing.
Which is, some people think that he may have been MK Ultra or hypnotized beforehand.
Absolutely, and just literally shuffled into place somehow. And look, I think it's completely tenable. I really do, because he'd taken, I think he was on some kind of it was like an equivalent of dexamphetamines. Like he had a prescription for that, but he'd taken well and truly above the normal prescribed amount earlier that day. It was in his system, and he was incredibly hyper. He was clearly in some kind of heightened state, and that does speak to how he was initially when he was set upon. It's kind of like he was being woken up, and when he was in Dallas police custody until he himself was transferred to the county jail the next day. It was like he was in these up and down moods and states. You know, sometimes some reports of, you know, statements attributed to him, he's incredibly erudite and very, you know, very calm, and other times he was taken with just absolute emotion. You know, when he heard that Oswald was killed, he died. Apparently he just switched to did a 180 and was just completely relieved, and God knows what kind of state of mind, or if there was some kind of programming to him. But, you know, it does speak to that, the way he was in those initial, you know, moments after the shooting. Because of course all we know is that he miraculously got into position, and he happened to know, you know, be friends with Blackie Harrison, who he was standing behind before he stood out to stepped out to shoot Oswald. And of course Kenneth Croy, another person that he was friends with, happened to be literally standing to Ruby's right.
He's a strike suspect. He ties to Captain Westbrook, who's very suspicious, especially when in the Tippett murder.
Yeah, absolutely. So do we have all the answers? No, we don't. Can we? Does that mean we should still not continue to look? Absolutely not. It is. The whole Jolly West point. I think there's probably more to that, and of course, documentation that may speak to it more. It may still be out there to be found.
Sure, absolutely. And then the other thing I want to go back to the Garrison notes, the index. You did such a tremendous job organizing that, and just when I'm going through it, the amazing thing is how Garrison never really stopped investigating, and that's what amazes me when I go through this the length, and not only that, but how he went into other things like secret societies and other investigations into suspicious crimes. But one of the things I really like, the evidence he had on David Ferry. I mean, he really had so much evidence on him that he was involved, and it just speaks now to Ferry's really suspicious death. The timing of that, really makes it even more suspicious than I even originally thought, just because of how much he had on Ferry.
The Garrison's case, albeit it was obviously largely positioned against Clay Shaw, as we all know. The case was doomed the moment that Ferry died, right? Because of how much he had, and he clearly, and it wasn't like it was in the movie. There was a lot of work through one of Garrison's staff that was leading the correspondence and the investigation on Ferry, but. The point was the Garrison's case was nixed when Ferry turned up dead.
Sure.
And we had these crazy witnesses who talked about needing to fingerprint their own daughter because they weren't sure if they were they were an imposter.
Right, sure.
Gordon Novell as well. He's a bit of a red herring. He might be a big nothing burger, but these alleged links to Dulles and God knows.
He's a disinformation machine, Novell.
Yeah, but the index. I'm glad you've been going through it because those files, like you say, Sean, are just they encapsulate so much. And I guess my thing was it really wasn't to stand up for Garrison in too many respects. I just wanted to help clear the record or establish the record a little bit more about just exactly how much he gathered, because we all know that there was a bit of controversy around Garrison and some of his methods at the time, and there was a big hit piece, big agenda pushing back against him during the Shaw investigation in the 60s, and then obviously afterwards with those pinball racketeering, corruption charges. But really just wanted to help clear the narrative on how effective and how close Garrison was on so many fronts. He followed literally every lead. He pushed hard on the Clinton, Louisiana aspect of Oswald being seen with someone matching the description of obviously Clay Shaw, which is incredibly distinct. To the Tommy Lee Jones character in JFK,
sure,
and David Ferry. That is a really important aspect. And then we're talking about we get into the Rose Jeremy, that whole incident, and Francis Fruge, who he was probably the thing that surprised me the most throughout the files is how prolific Francis Fruge was. He really he's a unique character because he had a stake in the whole game before President Kennedy's assassination, because of course he was the one that highlighted the importance of what Rose Jeremy was saying was there's going to be an assassination attempt they're going to get him in Dallas, talking about President Kennedy before in the lead up to Friday, November the 22nd. And he recognized the importance of what Rose Jeremy was saying, and he also contributed in ways to the investigation afterwards when Garrison came onto the case. So, and it's not all of Garrison's folders, of course. We know that there was a lot of records that were destroyed and lost. His his successor, Harry Connick, for whatever reason, sought to destroy these records that we have now and the index was built around. So it's not the full record, but you're right. I wholeheartedly agree that Garrison never stopped looking, and it took him in so many different directions. So I would urge anyone that's interested, not just in the assassinations of President Kennedy and Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy, because Garrison obviously looked into and collected, I think it's probably the better word, collected really interesting information on those fronts as well. But secret societies, the Bilderberg Group, Skull and Bones, Yale, MK Ultra, little bit on Watergate, right the way through to John Lennon and all of that aspect. And I think controversies with the Reagan administration.
He the 80s,
Yeah, Sean, you found a lot of things in those files. In fact,
and we did
a whole series on our Patreon.
Yeah, we did Patreon. We did speakeasy episodes on stuff that I found just fascinating, different things. And I'm still going through them. Just other things come up, but I'm going to go back and we're going to do more episodes on Patreon about it. But when you mentioned Rose Jeremy, I mean, of course, that story ties. She ties Ruby in. And then later on, Garrison's investigation would tie Sergio Acacia-Smith and Emilio Santana, which are two, Cuban exiles that tie to the CIA. Acacia-Smith ties the guy Bannister. He was in that building in New Orleans. So again, it's just, and Phillips ties in there. So it's just, it's just a whole web of, but that most of the Jeremy story is just, and like you mentioned, Fuge. I mean, just fascinating stuff.
It's interesting though. I'll tell you, one of the first things I did once I'd completed the index was I went back through to look for names of suspicious people that I'd really want to have more information on. So people like David Atlee Phillips, David Morales, who else? William Westbrook, William Harvey, 100%. Hardly mentioned. There's precious little. I think the only things that are in there about Westbrook are to do with, obviously what he contributed to the Dallas police investigation of Oswald shooting. There's very little, nothing on Morales. Maybe scant passing references when it comes to Phillips and Harvey. And I don't know if there's anything to that, but
what's interesting about that is because the way the CIA runs operations. I mean, he was more onto the New Orleans aspect of everything and how, Oswald was potentially being set up as a patsy. So some of these other aspects, some of these guys like an Angleton, stuff that he was doing, that would be hard for Garrison's investigation to reach that far. Even with Harvey, who probably would have been in charge of the mechanical side of what, Professor Pablo always talks about these regime change operations. Like there's different roles that everybody has. And Garrison was really onto one specific aspect of the intel operation, And when you mentioned Clay Shaw, what's interesting about that is when we just had an episode. We were talking about the suspicious deaths that happened around these congressional hearings, the Church Committee and the HSCA, and all these deaths in this period really. Of about 5 years, but really the 3-year period where all these people that would have been damaging their testimony and they end up dead. And the one thing is Clay Shaw's death falls right into that. I think it was 76 that he dies. Now, the official cause, I believe, was lung cancer, but there is some suspicious aspects of what happened. If people saw suspicious people come in this house that night, there was reports of that. And then I don't even know if there was an autopsy on that. I think he was buried rather quickly.
Yeah.
Whole thing. So Clay Shaw's death, it's just amazing that it falls right in that list of suspicious deaths because, if he was ever called to one of these committees, he had a lot to say. It could have been damaging.
100%. And that's why with these, the new, release of documents that are, have come out regarding the assassinations of both Kennedys, and soon, hopefully will start to come out soon in regards to Martin Luther King's assassination. Names are so critical, and obviously, just the smallest reference could just be that little link to bring together a bigger picture. So
Here's
I
the thing for me, Paul, is we know Oswald was James Angleton was controlling Oswald's security file. We also know from the files that he was controlling Sirhan's security file. So let's see what happens with James L. Ray. If that comes out, what's Angleton 3 for 3 on this? It's kind of hard to explain because Angleton's not an analyst. He's on the operations side of things. So if he's controlling, that's kind of hard to explain away.
Oh yeah, and his own links to obviously Mossad and all of that. I mean, oh wow, it's just a whole other realm to all of this. So just sensible analysis of the documents as they come out is what we need, and that just kind of talks back to the original reason why I did the index was to make it easy to remove. Do my best to kind of remove broad perceptions and go, right, here it is. Go use this index to find whatever Garrison had. So I think people can contribute a lot by being granular, and I think like Penn Jones said, pick an aspect of the case and research the hell out of it. And I think there's still a lot of opportunity to do that, and when people are doing that sensibly, we might be able to might not be able to bring all the pieces of the puzzle together, because that central, obviously that central piece to it all, Oswald, was snuffed out obviously very quickly. But if we can bring together as much around him as possible, we'll the people behind all of this will remain on the hook of the truth, as I say in my book, and that's all we can do. It's very important.
Well, Paul, we kept you a long time. You're probably dying to get out there, right? Start your day.
Get breakfast, right?
Yeah. It's been really good, guys. If I could, you wouldn't mind if I just touch on the whole Billy Grammar side of things.
Oh,
It doesn't have to be a long preamble, but I feel it's kind of important to do. If we're talking about the threats, then the whole Billy Grammar thing needs to be raised as well, because that is an instance where we literally only have one person's word to go on. To the point where, again, I cover it in the book a bit, but the story was that he was on duty of the across the night of Saturday and Sunday, November the 24th, and his story goes that a call came in and one of the female switchboard operators took it. It was a man asking if he wanted to speak to anyone that was there that he might know. And so the female switchboard operator started listing who else was on the phones present there that night. And when she said Billy Grammar, the caller said, "Oh, that'll do." And when Billy Grammar took the call, this person said, "The committee, part of we're going to kill Oswald at the start of his transfer, just letting you know, so you should so you're warned." And he had some details over the years. Grammar's account included reference to the caller saying, we know that the armored truck's going to be used as a decoy and all of that. But initially, when this story came out, Grammer told it to Henry Hurt, who of course had that book in like 1985, which was an incredible piece of work. But then the story kind of evolved that Grammer caught up with Jack Ruby earlier on that Saturday, and there was one reference to Ruby even coming into the City Hall and having a coffee with Grammer right there in the office. And the call that Grammer took apparently was anywhere from 9 o'clock Saturday evening to 3 o'clock the Sunday morning. So I mean, accounts over the years do change. I get that, but ultimately we don't have anyone else's corroboration for the Billy Grammar threats. And I've unpacked that again in another article on my Substack, not as a kind of a hit piece on Mr. Grammar, but just to say, look, we need to be careful when we have just one person's account to rely on. Because
absolutely,
the story goes that Grammer took down notes of the call and he called over his supervisor someone he called Lieutenant Putnam. And he and Putnam agreed that they should let Chief Curry know about it. So there was a note was passed on to Jesse Curry, and nothing was done apparently. Problem is that no one at Dallas police corroborated Grammer's story. We of course have Fraser on the record saying that we never received any threats directly. He said that to the FBI and the Sheriff's Department. The Lieutenant Putnam that Billy Grammer referred to, there was no Lieutenant Putnam. There was a Sergeant Putnam, and he was part of getting the basement secure with Pat Dean, that following morning. So he wasn't even on duty when these threats would have come in. There was an Inspector Henry J. Putnam, who, inspectors in the rank, in the chain of command are very high up. They report directly to the chief.
Sure.
He was a Henry Putnam that was the only Putnam, and his name happened to be Henry Putnam, who Grammer cited. But the problem was this Putnam, if he was an inspector and on charge on duty that night on the phones, that doesn't sound tenable. And of course, Curry never corroborated receiving this memo either. So it's just a story that, look, if it happened, look, it doesn't really have a big bearing on the scheme of things. It probably, if anything, talks to Ruby, having if it was Ruby that made the call, because Grammer alleged only after the fact, after Ruby shot Oswald, that, oh, that's right, it was Jack Ruby who made that call. It really doesn't have too much of a bearing, other than probably giving Ruby a little bit of the indication of foreknowledge and wanting to do something to get himself out of this assignment. So I just I talked a lot about the other threats to Oswald's life, so it's important to give the Grammer account some context as well. And to the point where I actually contacted Henry Hurt and said, Mr. Hurt, I'd love to know more about how the Grammer account came up. And obviously this is 40 odd years ago when he first spoke with Billy Grammer, so he wasn't able to give me too much other than what's in his book. So it's just important to get that out there, as well as we need to be careful when we only have one account to rely on. It's a warning to us all. Doesn't mean it didn't happen.
No,
it just needs that extra bit of scrutiny.
Especially if that source is someone who, is kind of questionable to begin with. It's great to double source, triple source everything.
That's right. And the Grammer only came out with the story 20 years after the fact. So for his own safety, he might have feared coming out with something like that. But again, it's not. The only thing that's damning against is Jesse Curry, because if he did get that memo that Jack Ruby called in to warn of the attack on Oswald, he didn't do anything. But it's also on record that he didn't do anything about the other threats that came through by way of the FBI department and the Sheriff's Department. So look, it's why he waited so long is kind of part of the question mark that we ought to have around Billy Grammer. But it's just something we need to be careful with. That's all.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Paul. This has been fantastic, buddy.
Thank you, and really good to talk to you guys. I had fantastic feedback after our last chat. So always good to get on and have a conversation with you. And I really appreciate you promoting the Lancer conference in November as well. I'm going to be there, making the long journey from Australia to it. So it's going to be great to connect with fellow researchers. I only ever get to speak to people over email and of course video calls like this. So it'd be nice to meet some people in person and talk about it all in a little bit more detail. So
And also your book is up on our bookshop.
Thanks for that. I'll have to keep you guys updated because I've got a hardback version coming out soon.
Okay. We can add that up there.
Definitely.
Thank you. And I've got probably the only other thing to say is I'm working on a bit of a what I call a book cast. So I've had the question a lot: is Death to Justice going to be coming out as an audio book. And I've toyed around with the idea for a lot, for a fair period of time. I'm not sure how well it would go over in Australian reading reading a book about such an American subject. So I realize there might be a little bit of sensitivity, or I might be polarizing to people out there. But what I'm actually working on is something called a book cast. So I'm literally going through my book, but in the areas where I don't have so much knowledge on. So Oswald's background, I'm happy to admit I'm not the most knowledgeable on, and even aspects of November 22nd, I'm bringing on fellow researchers to have a bit of a chat with.
Okay.
And to unpack these areas that I've gone into only in very general terms, and for the more detailed, for the more areas specifically related to the Oswald shooting, that is where I'll go into a lot more detail than is in my book. So ultimately, it'll be a limited series bookcast that's a podcast / audiobook. So stay tuned for that as well. It's really cool.
That's exciting.
Right. Good stuff, Paul.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Paul. We appreciate you spending all this time with us.
My pleasure, guys. Like I said last time, the conversations that you have with so many different people on the topic is not only entertaining and informative, but they're important. So I just give my thanks and encourage people to support and engage with you as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Paul.
Yeah.
All right, buddy.
All right.
A good day over there.
Yeah.
Hey, nice. You too.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye. That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.